There is a specific kind of silence that follows betrayal, not the peaceful kind, not the kind you find at the end of a long day, when the house is quiet and the world feels still. This silence is heavier. It settles in your chest like cold water, and no matter how many times you breathe, it doesn't move. I know that silence well. I lived inside it for months. Welcome back to Frontline Retribution, the channel for quiet people who get pushed 1 inch too far, and the moment the truth finally walks through the front door. If you've ever been the one who showed up when nobody was watching, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Clara, and the story I'm about to tell you, it isn't just about being cheated or lied to. It's about something far more personal. Something that cut deeper than any breakup or friendship fallout ever could. This is about my family, my blood, the people who were supposed to love me without condition and chose, instead, to love someone else more. Let me take you back to the beginning, not the dramatic beginning, not the part where everything falls apart. I want to take you back to the quiet years first, because that's where the real story lives. That's where you need to understand what I built and what was taken from me. I grew up in a modest home. My parents weren't wealthy, but they were hard-working. My father ran a small textile business that he'd built from nothing, early mornings, late nights, years of sacrifice. My mother kept everything together with the kind of quiet strength that women in our world rarely get credit for. And then there was me, the eldest daughter, the one who was always told, "You are responsible, Clara. You set the example." So I did. I studied hard. I stayed close to home when my friends were out living freely. I helped my father with his accounts on weekends, not because I was forced to, but because I understood what he was building. I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to carry it forward. When I graduated university with a degree in business, my father looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "You are the one who understands this family, Clara. You always have." I held on to those words like they were a promise. Then Marcus arrived. Marcus was not family, not by blood, not by history. He was the son of my father's old friend from another city, a man my father hadn't seen in over 2 decades. When that friend passed away unexpectedly, my father did what generous men do. He reached out. He offered help. He invited Marcus, 23 years old, newly orphaned and apparently struggling, to stay with us while he found his footing. I remember the day he walked through our door, quiet, humble, looking. He had this way of lowering his eyes when he spoke to my parents, respectful, almost shy. My mother immediately felt sorry for him. My father saw something of himself in the young man, a boy starting from zero, just like he once had. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything in particular. He was a guest. I was polite. That was all. But something shifted in our house the moment he arrived, something so slow and so subtle that I didn't notice it until it had already changed everything. Within weeks, Marcus was helping my father at the office. Just small things at first, running documents, making calls, organising files. My father said it would help Marcus learn. Give him something to do, keep him from feeling like a burden. I understood that, I respected it. But then the weeks became months, and the small things became larger things. Marcus started sitting in on meetings I used to attend. He started offering opinions on decisions my father used to discuss with me. And my father started listening. I told myself it was fine. Marcus was eager. My father was being kind. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. I started noticing the small moments first. A dinner where my father turned to Marcus to ask his opinion on expanding the business, a conversation he used to have with me on Sunday mornings over tea. A phone call where I overheard my father laughing with Marcus, the way he used to laugh with me. A comment my mother made, almost casually, about how Marcus reminds her of what a son would have been like. That sentence landed on me like something physical. A son. Like a son. I stood in that kitchen doorway and felt the floor shift beneath me, not dramatically, not all at once, just a quiet, slow tilt that I tried to convince myself I was imagining. But I wasn't imagining it. And deep down, I already knew. The moment I can pinpoint, the moment I could no longer pretend happened on a Tuesday evening in March. I had stayed late at the office, finishing a proposal I'd been working on for 3 weeks, a proposal to expand my father's business into a new market, with projections, supplier contacts, a full financial plan. I had worked harder on that document than on almost anything in my life. I slid it across my father's desk with quiet pride. He glanced at it, he nodded. Then he said, "Show it to Marcus first. Get his thoughts. He has some good instincts." I sat very still. Get his thoughts. Marcus, who had been in this business for 7 months. Marcus, who had never built anything, never sacrificed anything, never stayed up calculating margins on a Tuesday night. Marcus, whose last name wasn't even on the door. Get his thoughts. I picked up my proposal, I smiled, I said, "Of course." And then I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the sink with my hands pressed flat against the cold porcelain until the shaking stopped. That was the night I understood what was happening. My father wasn't being kind to Marcus anymore. He was replacing me with him. Slowly, quietly, without ever saying a single word, he was choosing this stranger over his own daughter, the one who had stayed, the one who had sacrificed, the one who had given him her best years and her sharpest mind and her most loyal heart. And neither of my parents even noticed what they were doing. That was perhaps the most painful part of all. Not the cruelty, because there was no cruelty. There was no villain twirling a cape, no dramatic declaration. There was just a family so dazzled by someone new that they had quietly, completely forgotten to see the person who had always been there. I went home that night and sat in my room in the dark for a very long time. And somewhere inside that silence, that heavy, cold, chest-filling silence I told you about at the beginning, something changed in me. I stopped grieving, and I started thinking. I want you to understand something about the weeks that followed. I did not fall apart. I did not confront anyone. I did not cry at the dinner table, or demand explanations, or make a scene that could be easily dismissed as emotional dramatic too much. I had learned, from a lifetime of being the responsible one, that the worst thing you can do when the ground is shifting beneath you is to move suddenly. You stay still. You watch. You understand exactly what you're dealing with before you decide what to do next. So that is what I did. And what I found, when I started paying real attention, was worse than I had imagined. Marcus wasn't just filling a role in my father's life. He was actively constructing one. Every choice he made, every opinion he offered, every conversation he steered. Every small kindness he performed in front of my parents was deliberate. I began to see the pattern. The way he would mention his ideas in front of my father, but frame them as something Clara and I were discussing, even when we hadn't spoken. The way he would ask my mother questions about the business, because he wanted to understand it the way the family did, making himself family in every sentence. The way he once said to my father, quietly, within my earshot, "I just want to make sure I'm doing right by you, Uncle. You've given me so much. Uncle." He had started calling my father Uncle. My father, I noticed, had started smiling more when Marcus was in the room. I began going through things I probably should have looked at sooner. Not snooping, I want to be precise about that. I was paying attention. There is a difference. I noticed that Marcus had been given signing authority on a secondary business account, something my father mentioned in passing as just for convenience. I noticed that he had been CC'd on correspondence with our primary supplier, a relationship I had spent 2 years building. I noticed that a new office had been quietly set up Marcus's name on a small plaque beside the door, a title underneath it that I had never been offered. Business Development Associate. I had no title, I had never been given one, I was just Clara, the daughter, the one who was always there. I sat with my mother one afternoon, just the two of us, over tea. I chose my words carefully. I said, "Mama, do you think Marcus is planning to stay long term? In the business, I mean." She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as gentle dismissal, the kind reserved for questions she found slightly naive. "Clara," she said, "your father is not getting younger. The business needs someone who can grow with it. Marcus is ambitious. He has drive. He reminds your father of himself." I waited a moment before I spoke again. "And what about me?" I asked. "Don't I remind him of himself?" My mother set down her cup. She looked at me kindly, and that kindness was somehow the most painful thing she could have offered me in that moment. "You are his daughter," she said. "That is different." I nodded. I smiled. I finished my tea. Different, not lesser. She would never say lesser. But the message was clear, wrapped in softness so I wouldn't bruise. I was the daughter, a permanent fixture. The furniture of the family, present and assumed and taken for granted in the way that only truly loyal people ever are. Marcus was the future, the investment, the exciting new chapter, and I was just the chapter they had already read. The moment that broke something permanent in me came on a Friday in April. My father called a family meeting. The kind he used to call when something significant was being announced, the kind I had always been part of, always been consulted about in advance. I came prepared, dressed well, ready. My father sat at the head of the table. Marcus sat to his right, where I had sat at every family meeting for as long as I could remember. I took the empty seat across from them. My father cleared his throat. He spoke with the warmth of a man who believed he was sharing wonderful news. He was restructuring the business, he said, creating a proper leadership hierarchy. He wanted the company to grow beyond him, to outlast him. And so he had made a decision. Marcus would be named co-director. I heard the words. I processed them. I kept my face very, very still. Co-director. A title. Authority, a share of everything my father had built, everything I had supported and contributed to, and quietly bled, forehanded to a man who had been in our lives for less than a year, a man whose last name was not ours, a man who had arrived with nothing and was now being given everything. My father looked at me across the table with genuine warmth. "Clara, you've always been the heart of this family. I know you'll welcome this. Marcus needs us, and we can give him a real foundation." He said it like a gift, like he was offering me a chance to be generous. I said, "Of course, Baba, I'm happy for him." And I watched Marcus nod at me, gracious, modest, perfectly performed, and something inside me went very, very quiet. Not sad, not any more. Quiet in the way that water goes quiet before it changes direction. That night, I sat at my desk and I opened my laptop, and I began to do what I had always done best, what my father had relied on me to do for years without ever once putting my name on a door. I started building something. Not revenge, not yet. Not in the way people imagine revenge. Sharp and impulsive and emotional. I started building proof, because here is what Marcus did not know about me. Here is what my family, in all their warm distraction, had forgotten. I had been managing this business's actual finances for 3 years. Not just reviewing managing, I knew every account, every supplier, every contract, every number that had ever moved through that company. And when I started looking, really looking with the cold clarity of someone who had nothing left to protect emotionally, I found things. Small things, at first, expenses that didn't quite line up, a supplier invoice that had been paid twice, once to the correct account and once to an account I didn't recognize. A small discrepancy in the materials order. A number that appeared in an outgoing transfer with no corresponding record in the ledger. I stayed up until 3 in the morning. By the time I closed my laptop, I had found enough to fill a file, and I finally understood exactly what kind of man Marcus was. He hadn't come to our family because he was lost. He hadn't stayed because he was grateful. He had stayed because he was patient. And he had been stealing from my father since the 3rd month he arrived. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in those first hours after I understood the full picture. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't even anger exactly. It was something closer to grief, a deep, exhausted grief for my father, who had opened his home and his heart and his business to a man who had calculated every single smile. I cried that night, not for myself, or maybe a little for myself, but mostly for my father. For the image of him at that dinner table, eyes warm, believing he was doing something good. Believing he was being generous and wise and kind. He was being robbed, and he had no idea. I spent 2 weeks being absolutely certain I was not going to walk into that house with half a story. I was not going to be the emotional daughter making accusations I could already hear how it would land, how easily it could be reframed as jealousy, as resentment, as a girl who couldn't handle being replaced. I had watched enough to know exactly how Marcus would spin it if I gave him any room, so I gave him none. I documented everything, every discrepancy, every duplicate payment, every unregistered transfer. I cross-referenced supplier records. I pulled payment timestamps. I built a file so thorough, so clean, so completely undeniable that even Marcus himself couldn't find a crack in it. And then I made one phone call, not to my father. Not yet. I called my father's accountant, a man who had worked with our family for 15 years, a man I trusted completely, a man who had no reason to protect Marcus and every reason to protect the integrity of the business he had helped build. I sent him the file. I asked him to review it independently. He called me back within 48 hours. His voice, when he spoke, was very careful and very grave. "Clara," he said, "this is serious. I chose a Sunday morning for the conversation with my father. Sunday mornings had always been our time tea at the kitchen table, slow and unhurried. I had timed my entire life around what mattered, and this was no different. I sat across from him with a printed copy of the file pages clipped neatly, organized clearly. I didn't lead with emotion. I didn't say he betrayed you, or he used us, or I told you so because I had never told him so, and because none of that was the point. I simply said, Baba, I need you to look at something. Take your time." And I watched my father read. I will not describe his face in detail, because some moments are private even in the telling. But I will say this, I watched a man who believed he had been generous slowly understand that he had been targeted. I watched him turn pages with hands that grew less steady with each one. I watched something change in his eyes, not break. Exactly, shift, the way a door shifts when the foundation beneath it moves. When he finally looked up at me, he didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "How long have you known?" 2 weeks, I said. I needed to be sure before I came to you. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression I had not seen in a long time. Not love had always been there, even when it was buried under distraction. Something else. "Recognition, you protected us," he said quietly. "I always have," I said, and I kept my voice very gentle, because I was not there to punish him. Marcus was confronted that same week. My father did not call the police immediately. He is not that kind of man. He gave Marcus the opportunity to confess, to explain, to offer some version of the truth. Marcus, to his credit, did not try to lie once the file was in front of him. The evidence was too complete. What he did instead was attempt to appeal. He talked about his circumstances, his grief, his desperation when he first arrived. He said he had intended to repay everything. He said he cared about this family. My father listened. He is a fair man deeply, genuinely fair. And then he told Marcus to return every rupee and leave our home before the end of the week, or he would involve the authorities. Marcus left in 4 days. I did not feel triumphant when he walked out the door. I want to be honest about that. There was no dramatic moment of victory, no satisfaction in watching him go. What I felt was something quieter relief, mostly, and an exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time and finally being allowed to set it down. But there were other conversations that mattered more to me than Marcus's departure. My mother came to my room 2 days after everything came out. She sat on the edge of my bed and didn't speak for a while. She is not a woman who apologizes easily, not because she is hard, but because she is proud, and sometimes pride and love get tangled together in a way that makes it hard to separate them. Finally, she said, "I didn't see you, Clara. I should have." That was all. 4 words and a half sentence. But I understood everything inside them. My father restructured the business again. This time, my name went on the documents not just as a family member, not just as a silent contributor, as a director. My own title, my own authority. 3 years of work finally recognized on paper. He also sat me down one morning, the 2 of us, and said something I have thought about many times since. I mistook loyalty for permanence, he said. I thought because you were always there, you would always be fine. I forgot that even the strongest people need to be seen. I think about those words often, not just in the context of my family, but in the context of every workplace, every friendship, every relationship where someone reliable and steady and always present gets overlooked in favour of whoever is new and shining and loud. The world has a habit of chasing novelty, of mistaking familiarity for expendability. If there is something I want you to take from my story, it is this. Your consistency is not invisible even when it feels that way. The work you do quietly, the sacrifices you make without announcement, the loyalty you give without condition, none of it disappears. It may be overlooked for a season. It may be taken for granted by people who love you but have stopped truly seeing you, but it builds something real, something solid, something that, when the moment comes, speaks for itself without you having to raise your voice. I never stormed, I never demanded, I never begged for recognition. I simply did what I had always done. I paid attention. I did the work. I told the truth. And in the end, the truth was the only weapon I ever needed. They gave him everything and left me nothing. But what they forgot, what he never counted on, was that I had already built something he could never take. My father's trust, my own integrity, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge of exactly who I am. That was always mine. It still is. And no one can give you what you have already earned.